Chapter 11 deals with interest groups. That's what we're going to talk about now. Now, an interest group is an organization of people with shared policy goals who attempt to influence what the government does. Interest groups pursue their goals in all types of different ways, and we'll talk about those today. They are different from parties. Parties try to win elections. Interest groups try to get policies implemented that they like. Interest groups are policy specialists. Interest groups tend to care about one specific thing, where, of course, if you're going to be a political party or a political candidate, you have to have some sort of knowledge, or you hopefully do, about an enormous array of different issues. Now, first we're going to talk about three theories of interest groups: pluralist theory, elite theory, and hyper-pluralist theory. And let me go into those in some detail here. Pluralism, or the pluralist theory of interest groups, says that interest groups are great. They're a link between the people and the government. That is, they're a linkage institute, a way we interact with the government. They compete, and the ones that have the most support will win. So if you think about, for example, there's a lot of pro-life groups that want to see abortion made illegal, and a lot of pro-choice groups. And those are interest groups. They're trying to influence government policy, right? And a pluralist would say, well, whichever one has the most support will win, and that will be the policy that the government does. It also argues that no one group will become too dominant. If groups try to overreach, they will become unpopular, according to a pluralist. Pluralists also argue that interest groups tend to play by the rules. They tend to play fair. They also argue that if a group is weak in one resource, maybe it doesn't have a lot of money, it might be strong in another resource. It has a lot of supporters. And if it doesn't have anything, then it probably shouldn't be impacting the government, a pluralist would tell you. Finally, they argue that any group can lobby the government, so it's just a big competition, and the most worthy groups will win. Kind of a market theory of interest groups. Elite theorists deny this. They say that in reality, power is held by a relative few, and that power is based on money. And so the largest, most corporate interests hold all the power. So, for example, you think about an environmental group like they say the Sierra Club, that's an interest group, or the Audubon Society, or any Greenpeace, any group arguing to protect the environment. They are arguing for policies that are directly in opposition to what, say, the oil companies want. And an elite theorist will say this is a joke. The oil companies have all the money. They're going to get their way. Elite power is made even more intense by a system of interlocking power centers that reinforce the power of the corporations. We'll get to that. They argue that other groups may win minor policy battles, but the elites prevail when it comes to big policy decisions. And an elite theorist would say, look at an issue like gay marriage. Is this an issue that has a lot of money involved? Not really, not directly. There's not some giant, well-financed corporate interest fighting against gay marriage. So therefore, gay marriage advocates can win on that issue. But look at an issue like renewable energy or reforming health care. There are giant moneyed interests on the other side of that, and so there will never be true reform or true change. This is what elite theorists would argue, because you can fight against causes where there's not big money supporting them, but you can't fight against, or successfully fight against causes that have a lot of money backing them up. They argue that lobbying is a problem. They say that lobbying actually only benefits those with money, because money buys influence, and influence gets the policies that you want. Hyperpluralism is a different theory, and it starts with the idea of subgovernments. It talks about groups that exercise a great deal of control over specific policy areas. Subgovernments are often called iron triangles because there's three parts to them. The interest group that's going in and trying to get the policy at once, the government agency that regulates that policy, and the congressional committee. So, for example, we might think of the Department of Defense. They spend more money than any other department in our country, and they're buying weapons, of course. Now, who are the interest groups here? Well, the interest groups here are the defense contractors, the people they buy the weapons from. Well, those people have a huge incentive to get as much money from the government as possible. So what do? They donate money to the congressional committee, the members of Congress who sit on the committees that control this. They develop close relationships with the Department of Defense. and they get what they want. This is a hyper-pluralist theory. So consequently, we have government spending going to the military that the military isn't even asking for. In fact, we have many situations where the military has specifically said, we don't want this plane, we don't want this this piece of military equipment, and they get it anyway because the defense contractors go in and they lobby the people on the committee to get it. And you look at the government agency, an enormous percentage of generals, when they retire from the highest levels of the military, go work for the Department of Defense. So they have an incentive to give those people, I'm sorry, not Department of Defense, an enormous percentage of generals when they retire go work for the defense contractors for enormous salaries, far more than they ever made in the military. So they have a great incentive to do what those people want too. So a hyper-pluralist argues that it is really these iron triangles that are controlling the government. The problem with this is as the government tries to appease everyone, as it tries to make every potential donor happy, more and more of these iron triangles form. They all try to do more and more. We get contradictory policy, and we get tons of policy. Because most people who interact with the government want the government to do something for them. So we end up with more regulation, more government spending, because most people want the government to spend money in one way or the other. And the government grows and grows and grows out of control. And a hyper-pluralist would point to our massive government spending, our exploding deficits, our ever-increasing regulations. They would point to the increase in lobbying. And they would say this is simply the government trying to say yes to everyone who shows up with a campaign contribution. If you're curious, here's a list of the most powerful 25 interest groups in the country. You see there right at the top, the National Rifle Association, followed by the American Association of Retired Persons. We'll talk about what makes a group successful next, but you might pause it and look at this group.